depths of time, in a dark and silent chamber kilometers beneath the Earth's surface, lay a secret that would change everything we thought we knew about the story of humanity. This is the tale of a species that lived among the shadows, neither exactly like us nor entirely different from us. The questions of who they were, how they lived, and most importantly, how they entered that inaccessible cave are like a mirror held up to our own past. This is the story of Homo Naledi. It all began with a coincidence. In South Africa, in a region known as the Cradle of Humanity, two adventurous cavers discovered a previously unexplored passage. They slid downward through a narrow corridor, so narrow it could barely fit a human. This passage opened into a pitch-black chamber. When the light of their flashlights illuminated the bones on the ground, they realized this was no ordinary animal. The bones resembled those of a human, but were strangely different. The name of this narrow passage was Dragon's Back, and the chamber they reached would later be known as the Naledi Chamber, the Chamber of Stars. This discovery would create an earthquake in the world of paleoanthropology. The cavers immediately reported their find to scientists. Lee Berger, one of the most important paleoanthropologists in the region, immediately understood how significant this discovery could be when he received the news. However, there was a problem. Reaching the Naledi chamber was nearly impossible. The passage was so narrow that experienced, large-bodied researchers couldn't enter. For this reason, Berger made an unprecedented call. Through social media, he announced he was looking for slender, small-bodied researchers with scientific qualifications who could work in confined spaces. Applications came in from around the world, and eventually a 6-person team composed entirely of women was selected. They would be called the Underground Astronauts, and they would open one of the most mysterious pages in human history. The team spent weeks in grueling work, passing through those narrow passages to bring the bones to the surface. Each bone fragment was carefully packaged and transported to the surface. The initial findings were astonishing. In the chamber, there were remains belonging to only a single species, and these remains belonged to at least 15 different individuals. Children, adolescents, adults. An entire community seemed to have been deliberately placed there. This situation brought with it a mystery never before seen in any hominin species. How had these people gotten here, and why was there no other entrance to the chamber? They couldn't have been dragged inside by predators, because there were no predator tooth marks on the bones. It also seemed unlikely that they had been swept in by a flood or natural event, because the sediment structure in the chamber didn't indicate this. Only one possibility remained. But this possibility was so radical that the scientific world would struggle to accept it. When the bones extracted from the Rising Star Cave were assembled in the laboratory, the picture that emerged plunged scientists into even greater astonishment. The creature before them didn't exactly match any known hominin species. Different parts of its body seemed to have been taken from different periods of the evolutionary timeline. For this reason, it was described as having mosaic anatomy. On one hand, it bore characteristics belonging to our ancestors from millions of years ago, the Australopithecines, while on the other hand, it resembled modern humans, Homo sapiens, to a surprising degree. This situation was one of the most concrete pieces of evidence that human evolution didn't progress in a straight line, but rather like a much more complex, branching tree. For example, the shoulder structure and curved finger bones resembled our primitive ancestors adapted to climbing trees. These features suggested that Homo Naledi spent part of its life in trees, perhaps feeding there or taking refuge from dangers. The rib cage had a funnel-shaped structure that widened at the bottom. This was again a primitive feature seen in Australopithecines. However, the hands, wrists, and especially feet belonging to the same skeleton were surprisingly modern. Their feet were almost indistinguishable from those of a modern human, fully adapted to walking long distances on 2 legs. This showed that they were skilled walkers. Their hands presented a similar dilemma. Although the finger bones were curved for climbing, the palm and especially the thumb structure implied that they had the precision grip capability necessary for tool-making and use. This situation was strong evidence that Homo Naledi lived in 2 different worlds, both in trees and on the ground. This anatomical complexity also made classification difficult. Some basic features like brain size were primitive, while other features that could be behavioral clues were quite developed. This challenged one of paleoanthropology's fundamental assumptions. It raised the possibility that advanced behaviors didn't necessarily have to be associated with a large brain. Homo naledi was like an evolutionary experiment, a species that tried to bring together the best features from different times, but did so in an unexpected combination. This mosaic structure brought with it new and complex questions, not only about what it looked like, but also about how it lived, what it ate, and how it interacted with its environment. Perhaps the most surprising and most debated feature of Homo naledi was the size of its skull. Measurements showed that brain volume averaged between 450 and 610 cubic centimeters. This was roughly equivalent to a third of a modern human's brain volume, and was closer to the brain sizes of more primitive hominins like Australopithecus, who lived millions of years ago. This small brain created a complete contrast with the other modern features in Homo naledi's anatomy, especially when considering the theory that the bones in the Naledi chamber might have been deliberately placed there. This situation became a great puzzle. The general consensus long accepted in the scientific world was that complex, symbolic, or ritualistic behaviors required large brain capacity. For example, burying one's dead was an act requiring symbolic thought, planning, and an abstract understanding of the concept of death. Whether Homo naledi, with its orange-sized brain, could exhibit such behavior became the most heated topic of debate from the first days of the discovery. Not only the size of the brain, but also its structure was examined. Casts taken from the inner surface of the skull gave clues about the brain's external structure. Examination showed that some regions of the brain, especially areas associated with language and social behaviors, might have been unexpectedly developed relative to its size. For example, the structure of the region known as Broca's area, associated with speech ability, showed similarities to some Homo species. This gave rise to speculation that Homo naledi might have possessed a primitive form of communication. However, this was only a possibility, and proving it was nearly impossible. The small brain raised fundamental questions about the limits of their cognitive abilities. Could they use tools? If yes, how complex were the tools they could make? What was their social structure like? What kind of cooperation existed within the group? And most importantly, did they have the mental capacity to decide to enter that dark and dangerous cave system and leave their dead there? Homo naledi's small brain demolished the simple and linear narrative about human evolution. It reminded us that intelligence and complex behaviors might not be solely measured by brain size, that evolution could produce different solutions in different species. This small skull was like an invitation for us to reconsider our own understanding of intelligence and the capabilities of our ancestors. Perhaps the parts of Homo naledi's skeleton that tell the clearest story are its hands and feet. These limbs strikingly revealed the species' dual lifestyle, being both a creature that climbed trees and one that walked on the ground. This situation showed how flexible their adaptation ability was, and that they used multiple strategies to survive. Their hands were a perfect example of this dilemma. On one hand, the finger bones, especially the middle phalanges, were distinctly curved. This feature is ideal for firmly grasping tree branches and rocks, and is generally seen in primitive hominins, like Australopithecus, who spent significant time in trees. This curved structure suggested that Homo naledi maintained its climbing ability, perhaps actively using trees to search for food, escape from predators, or spend the night in a safe place. However, in contrast to this primitive structure of the fingers, the wrist and thumb anatomy was surprisingly modern. Especially the thumb was long and strong enough to make complete opposition movements with the other fingers. This is a feature known as precision grip and forms the basis of modern humans' tool-making and using ability. A strong thumb makes it possible to hold small objects with great skill, nap stone tools, or finely processed foods. This strengthened the thesis that Homo naledi was potentially a tool user. Although stone tools directly belonging to them haven't yet been found in the cave, the anatomy of their hands clearly showed they had this capability. Their feet completed the other half of the story. Homo naledi's feet were so developed they were nearly indistinguishable from a modern human's. The arch of the foot was prominent. The big toe was aligned with the other toes and pointed forward. The heel bone was also structured to support prolonged walking on two legs. These features were definitive proof that they were efficient bipeds, creatures that walk on two legs. They could easily cover long distances while stepping from forested areas toward the savanna. The slight curvature of the toe bones could be interpreted as a small trace remaining from their climbing past. However, the general structure belonged entirely to a ground-dwelling creature. This situation offered a critical clue for understanding Homo naledi's habitat and behaviors. They were versatile creatures not confined to a single ecological niche. They maintained the climbing abilities inherited from their ancestors, while also being able to move efficiently on the ground like more modern hominins. This showed how successful they could be at adapting to changing environmental conditions. The tool-making potential in their hands and the long-distance walking capability in their feet made them a quite skillful and adaptable species. The primitive features in Homo naledi's anatomy were most evident in the shoulder and ribcage structure. These regions carried important clues about the species' evolutionary past and revealed their deep connection with trees. These parts of the skeleton resembled the Australopithecines much more than modern humans and clearly showed how different their movement capabilities were from ours. The shoulder joint, especially the position of the scapula, was a sign of adaptation for climbing. Homo naledi's scapula was positioned higher on the back, not sideways as in modern humans. This allowed them to easily raise their arms above their head and make swinging movements. This type of shoulder structure is typical for creatures that move between tree branches or support their body weight with their arms. The length of the clavicle also supported this climbing ability. This anatomical structure suggested that they weren't creatures that only occasionally climbed trees, but that climbing was an important part of their daily life. Perhaps they fed on fruits, hid from predators, or made nests for themselves in treetops to sleep at night. The ribcage also completed this primitive picture. Unlike modern humans' barrel-shaped wide ribcage, Homo naledi's ribcage had a conical or funnel-shaped structure that widened at the bottom and narrowed upward. This was again a primitive feature seen in Australopithecines and indicated a diet probably dominated by fibrous plant foods, requiring a larger digestive system. A wide lower rib cage can house a large abdominal cavity. This suggested that their diet contained more plant matter than modern humans, and that they needed a longer intestinal system to digest this matter. This conical rib cage structure also gave an idea about their posture and gait. Perhaps they didn't swing their arms like modern humans when walking, using a different balance mechanism. When these primitive features in the shoulder and rib cage were combined with the modern structure in their feet and hands, it once again revealed what a unique creature Homo naledi was. They were beings standing at an evolutionary crossroads. While carrying the legacy of their ancestors' arboreal lifestyle, they were also displaying the characteristics of modern hominins, ready to stand upright on two legs and explore new worlds. This situation formed the basis of their survival strategy. They belonged to both the old and new worlds. They were trying to sustain their existence by using the advantages of both environments. Homo naledi's pelvic bone anatomy presented perhaps one of the most complex and illuminating examples of the mosaic structure. This bone structure, also known as the pelvis, contains invaluable information about a creature's posture, gait, and even birth process. In Homo naledi, this structure was a lesson in how both primitive and modern features could exist together. Overall, the pelvic bone clearly indicated that it belonged to a creature that walked upright on two legs. However, when examined in detail, it became clear that the situation wasn't that simple. The upper part of the pelvic bone, the iliac wings, was quite wide and open laterally, as in Australopithecines. This is a primitive feature that affects how the hip muscles attach and indicates that walking mechanics might be somewhat different from modern humans. This wide structure probably caused more lateral swaying of the body while walking. That is, their gait might have appeared somewhat more waddling than a modern human's fluid walk. This didn't mean that their ability to walk on two legs was less efficient than ours. It just shows that they developed a different biomechanical solution. They had found a way to adapt the muscle structure, remaining from their ancestors' climbing past, to bipedal walking. However, the lower part of the pelvic bone displayed modern features characteristic of the Homo genus, in complete contrast to this primitive structure. Especially the structure of the hip joint and the shape of the ischium bone were of a nature to support upright posture and efficient walking. This showed that they were well adapted not only for short distances, but also for long-duration walks. When combined with the modern structure of their feet, it became clearly visible how well Homo naledi had adapted to a terrestrial lifestyle. The pelvic bone also provides information about the birth canal. Homo naledi's birth canal had a structure suitable for the passage of a small-brained baby's head. This was another proof that the species' reproductive biology was consistent with its small brain size. Homo naledi's pelvic bone shows us how diverse paths human evolution followed. The transition to upright posture didn't proceed along a single correct path. Different hominin species found different solutions to bipedalism within the framework of their own anatomical heritage. Homo naledi was just one of these solutions. Their gait was perhaps a bit different from ours, but this didn't make them less human. On the contrary, it reminded us how many different forms being human could take. They were successful and adaptable creatures on their own evolutionary path, carrying both traces of the past and stepping into the future. A creature's fossilized teeth are like a silent but extremely detailed diary of its life. They carry traces of what it ate, how it grew, and even what kinds of difficulties it encountered. Homo naledi's teeth were no exception to this rule. The hundreds of teeth found in the Dinaledi chamber offered invaluable information about this mysterious species' diet, growth rate, and general health status. At first glance, the general shape and structure of the teeth closely resembled other early members of the Homo genus. Especially the small premolars and canine teeth had a reduced structure as in modern humans. This was a clear difference from the large and powerful grinding teeth of Australopithecines and showed that their diet had undergone a change. Large molars are adapted for grinding hard and fibrous plants, while smaller teeth are generally seen in species that consume softer or processed foods. This situation suggested that Homo naledi's diet might not be as challenging and abrasive as their ancestors. Perhaps they were somehow processing their food. Perhaps they were consuming softer fruits, leaves, or even meat. The microscopic wear marks on the teeth offered clearer evidence on this matter. The fine scratches and pits in the tooth enamel can show what types of foods the individual consumed in the last periods of their life. The wear patterns on Homo naledi's teeth revealed that they fed on a mixed diet. Both pits caused by hard objects and scratches left by softer foods were present. This showed that their diet was quite varied, probably including different food sources such as fruits, nuts, roots, and perhaps small animals or insects. Especially the presence of small fractures and chips in the tooth enamel indicated that their diet also included hard and abrasive materials like sand or soil. This probably meant that they consumed roots or tubers collected from the ground without cleaning them. Teeth are also a key to understanding individuals' age and growth rate. Just like tree rings, tooth enamel also forms in layers during growth, and these layers provide information about the individual's development rate. Analyses performed on Homo naledi teeth showed that their growth rate was faster than modern humans, but slower than Australopithecines. That is, they had a human-like development model. This was another proof confirming their place within the Homo genus. In short, Homo naledi's teeth told not only what they ate but also who they were. They were skillful and flexible creatures that could diversify their diet to adapt to their changing environment. When Homo naledi was first discovered, because of the primitive features in its anatomy, scientists thought it was a very old species. Perhaps it was a species that lived 2 million or even 3 million years ago in the early periods of human evolution. Its shoulder structure, rib cage, and small brain seemed to place it on the timeline alongside species like Homo habilis or Australopithecus. If this initial assumption were correct, it would make Homo naledi one of the earliest members of the Homo genus. However, in science, assumptions must be tested with evidence. Determining the age of fossils is one of paleoanthropology's most challenging and important tasks. The conditions in the Rising Star Cave made the dating process even more complex. The sediment layers in the Dinaledi chamber where the bones were found made the application of classical radiometric dating methods difficult. For this reason, scientists had to use different and innovative methods. When the results of analyses performed with multiple independent methods in several different laboratories arrived, the paleoanthropology world was once again shaken. The results showed something no one expected. Homo naledi wasn't an old species at all. The age of the bones was dated to approximately 236,000 to 335,000 years ago. This was an incredibly young date. This date placed Homo naledi in a completely different position on the timeline. It wasn't a primitive experiment that lived at the dawn of human evolution. On the contrary, it was a contemporary that lived in the same geography with the first members of our own species, Homo sapiens, during the period when they were emerging in Africa. This discovery fundamentally changed our understanding of human evolution. We now knew that hundreds of thousands of years ago, Africa wasn't only home to our ancestors. There was another human species on the continent that looked very different from us, with a small brain, but surprisingly modern features. This showed that there wasn't a single way of being human, that in the past, there was a complex and diverse world where different human species existed together. Homo naledi's young age deepened the mystery of the Naledi chamber even more. If they lived so recently, they're potentially exhibiting such a complex behavior as deliberately leaving their dead in a cave became an even more radical claim. Because this would mean that a small-brained hominin might have independently developed symbolic behaviors that its large-brained contemporary Homo sapiens was thought to be just beginning to display. This dating transformed Homo naledi from just an old fossil into a living question mark that causes us to question our own origins and the uniqueness of our species. The biggest and most enduring mystery about the discovery of Homo naledi is the Naledi chamber itself. Why was this deep, dark, and difficult-to-reach chamber filled with the remains of at least 15 different individuals? The answer to this question could change everything we thought we knew about Homo naledi's cognitive abilities and culture. The path to the chamber is extremely difficult and dangerous. It resembles a labyrinth consisting of narrow passages, steep slopes, and pitch darkness. This situation makes simple explanations for how the bones might have gotten there nearly impossible. Scientists have proposed several different hypotheses to solve this mystery. The first hypothesis was that the individuals fell into some kind of natural trap. Perhaps the cave had a different entrance in the past, and these individuals fell inside and were trapped there. However, there are problems with this theory. First of all, the presence of individuals from different age groups, babies, children, adolescents, and adults, in the chamber indicates a recurring event over a long period rather than a single catastrophic event. Additionally, the distribution pattern of the bones on the chamber floor doesn't show trauma marks that would result from a high fall. The bones are quite well preserved, and many are found in anatomically correct positions. A second hypothesis was that predatory animals hunted these individuals and carried them to the chamber. However, this also seems unlikely. There are no tooth marks or gnawing signs on the bones of the type that would be left by predators like large cats or hyenas. Additionally, no remains of any large animal other than Homo naledi were found in the chamber. Predators generally don't carry their prey to such a place and don't target only a single species. The third and most radical hypothesis is the thesis proposed by the discovery team. Homo naledi was deliberately leaving its dead in this chamber. This could mean some kind of burial or ritualistic behavior. If this is true, it's a revolutionary finding for paleoanthropology. Because until now, it was thought that the only species that consciously disposed of or buried their dead were large-brained hominins like Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. For Homo naledi, with its orange-sized brain, to have an abstract understanding of death, to show respect for the bodies of group members, and to carry them to the depths of the cave on this dangerous journey is an incredibly complex behavior. This implies how strong their social bonds were and that they might have had symbolic thought capacity. This hypothesis is still controversial due to lack of evidence. No other evidence has been found in the chamber that could indicate a ritual, such as grave goods, offerings, or traces of fire. However, the weakness of other hypotheses brings the deliberate placement theory forward as a strong candidate. Is the Naledi chamber a grave, a trap, or something else we haven't yet thought of? This question lies at the heart of Homo naledi's mystery, and its answer could forever change our understanding of what it means to be human. The pelvic bone also provides information about the birth canal. Homo naledi's birth canal had a structure suitable for the passage of a small-brained baby's head. This was another proof that the species' reproductive biology was consistent with its small brain size. Homo naledi's pelvic bone shows us how diverse paths human evolution followed. The transition to upright posture didn't proceed along a single correct path. Different hominin species found different solutions to bipedalism within the framework of their own anatomical heritage. Homo naledi was just one of these solutions. Their gait was perhaps a bit different from ours, but this didn't make them less human. On the contrary, it reminded us how many different forms being human could take. They were successful and adaptable creatures on their own evolutionary path, carrying both traces of the past and stepping into the future. The remains found in the Naledi chamber weren't just individual skeletons. They presented a snapshot of a community. The presence of individuals from every stage of life, from babies to the elderly, carried important clues about Homo naledi's social structure and life cycle. These remains are among the strongest evidence that they weren't solitary, isolated beings, but rather lived in groups connected to each other with complex social bonds. Among the remains, one of the most touching was the quite complete male skeleton named Neo, along with bones belonging to children and even a baby. The presence of children is especially important. This shows that the group was a reproducing population that continued its lineage. Additionally, the fact that these vulnerable individuals were also brought to that deep and dangerous chamber brings to mind the value placed on them and a sense of responsibility toward all members of the group. If the deliberate placement hypothesis is correct, this act applied not only to adults, but also to the smallest members of the community. This could suggest that they exhibited common behavior in the face of death and loss, that they shared grief and mourning. Their ability to act as a community must have been vitally important not only in their response to death, but also in their daily lives. Despite their small brains, they had to cooperate to hunt in groups, gather food, and defend themselves against predators. The presence of different age groups together could also indicate the existence of a social learning process in which knowledge and skills were transferred between generations. Older individuals might have been teaching the young where to find food, which plants were poisonous, or how to make tools. Children might have been learning social roles and survival skills through play. The large number of individuals in the Naledi chamber, at least 15 individuals, and this number continues to grow, suggests that this behavior wasn't a one-time event, but rather might be a tradition, a cultural practice. Perhaps this cave system had special meaning for this community for generations. Perhaps this was their gateway to the other world. Such complex social behaviors are generally associated with language. Without communicating with each other, organizing and sustaining such a difficult task, carrying the dead to the depths of the cave, is nearly impossible. We may never know if Homo naledi had a language. However, the evidence in the Naledi chamber strongly implies that they could communicate effectively with each other and had strong social bonds. They weren't just a biological species, but beings with a culture, a community. The world in which Homo naledi lived approximately 300,000 years ago was quite different from today's South Africa. This geological period, known as the Middle Pleistocene, was a time when the climate constantly fluctuated, with dry and wet periods following each other. This dynamic environment was one of the most important factors shaping Homo naledi's survival strategies. Understanding their world helps us better interpret their anatomy and behaviors. During that period, the region's vegetation wasn't like today's. It was probably a mosaic landscape covered with more forested areas and riparian vegetation, but also containing extensive grasslands and savannas. This diversity offered an ideal environment for a species like Homo naledi, adapted to both climbing and walking. Wooded areas provided them with food, fruits, nuts, shelter, and protection from predators, while open savannas allowed them to roam in a wider geography and explore different resources. This complex ecosystem also hosted rich animal life. Homo naledi shared this world with giant antelope herds, zebras, extinct horse species, and elephants, large herbivores. However, this world was also full of dangers. Formidable predators like saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and large lions occupied the top of the food chain. Homo naledi was both hunter and prey. Moving in small groups and cooperating, they had to defend themselves against these predators. Perhaps they retreated to trees or rocky shelters at night to stay safe. The Rising Star cave system might have been an important refuge or reference point for them. Fluctuations in climate constantly changed the availability of resources. During dry periods, water and food became scarce, while during rainy periods, vegetation revived and prey animals became plentiful. Homo naledi's flexible diet and versatile movement capability were the most important advantages that enabled them to adapt to these variable conditions. They weren't dependent on a single food source or habitat. They could change their strategies according to seasons and climate cycles. Their world was also a world shared with other human species. At that time in Africa, the first ancestors of Homo sapiens, and perhaps other archaic human species like Homo heidelbergensis, were also living. It's unknown whether these different groups encountered each other, whether they interacted. However, it's clear that Homo naledi was just one piece of a complex human mosaic. Their existence shows that Africa at that time was a dynamic and competitive place that hosted different evolutionary experiments. Surviving in this rich and challenging world is the greatest proof of how resilient and adaptable a species Homo naledi was. The anatomy of Homo naledi's hands clearly shows that they had the potential to make and use tools. The modern thumb structure that provides precision grip capability leaves very little doubt on this matter. However, whether this potential turned into reality, that is, whether they actually used tools, remains one of paleoanthropology's most important questions. Because to date, no stone tools have been found within the Rising Star cave system that could be directly associated with Homo naledi. This situation creates a dilemma. On one side, there's a hand anatomically extremely suitable for toolmaking. On the other side, there's no direct archaeological evidence that this capability was used. There are several possible scenarios to explain this lack of evidence. The first possibility is that Homo naledi made tools from organic materials, wood, bone, horn, that rot and disappear over time, instead of stone tools. A wooden spear, a digging stick, or a scraper made from bone can be just as functional as stone tools. However, such materials cannot be preserved for hundreds of thousands of years. If Homo naledi's tool culture primarily relied on such materials, it's normal that they haven't left any trace behind. This scenario doesn't diminish their intelligence or skill. It just shows how incomplete the archaeological record can be. A second possibility is that the tools were used outside the cave, not inside. If the Dinaledi chamber is thought to be a burial area, it makes sense that people wouldn't bring their daily use items there. Homo naledi might have made and used stone tools where they hunted, gathered food, and lived. However, since these areas haven't yet been discovered, these tools might not have been found either. South Africa hosts numerous stone tool finds from that period. Perhaps some of these tools were unknowingly made by Homo naledi. However, it's impossible to say definitively which species made a tool without fossil remains of that species beside it. A third and less likely scenario is that despite their tool-making potential, they never used this ability or used it at a very basic level. Perhaps their ecological niche allowed them to survive without needing complex tools. However, this contradicts the general trend of the Homo genus. Because tool use is one of our genus's most defining features, this problem reminds us of the difficulties in interpreting archaeological evidence. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We cannot say definitively that Homo naledi didn't use tools. We can only say that we haven't yet found direct evidence of this. The structure of their hands whispers that they had this ability. Perhaps future discoveries will transform this whisper into concrete evidence. Until then, Homo naledi's technological capacity will remain a secret. The Rising Star cave system is a place that reveals its secrets slowly and with difficulty. A few years after the discovery of the Dinaledi chamber, a new discovery was made in a different part of the same cave system, called the Lasidi chamber. This chamber was about 100 meters from Dinaledi, and again in an extremely difficult-to-reach location. The new fossils found in the Lasidi chamber further deepened our knowledge about Homo naledi and offered new answers to some old questions while bringing new mysteries with them. In the Lasidi chamber, remains belonging to at least 3 individuals were found. One of these individuals was an extraordinarily complete male skeleton called Neo. Neo is one of the most complete hominin skeletons ever found and revealed previously unknown details about Homo naledi's anatomy. For example, it presented a much clearer picture of the structure of its spine, the length of its legs, and body proportions. Thanks to Neo, it became more clearly understood that Homo naledi was a slender, long-limbed creature approximately 1.5 meters tall and weighing 45 kilograms. The most important aspect of this new discovery was that it showed Homo naledi's behavior of leaving its dead in the depths of the cave wasn't limited to a single chamber. There was now a second location where the same behavior was repeated. This situation significantly strengthened the deliberate placement hypothesis. The accumulation in a single chamber could be explained as a coincidence or a strange anomaly. However, the repetition of the same pattern in a different part of the cave system greatly reduced the possibility that this was a random event. This suggested that Homo naledi consistently exhibited this behavior, that it was part of their culture. The location of the Lasidi chamber also resembled Dinaledi. Reaching there also required passing through narrow passages and climbing. This was another proof that the bodies weren't dragged there by natural means, but were carried with conscious effort. The fact that individuals who lived at different times in two different chambers were accumulated in the same way implied that this cave system had importance for Homo naledi communities that lasted for generations. Perhaps this was a sacred place where their ancestors rested. The discovery of the Lasidi chamber made the question of how Homo naledi, with its small brain, could exhibit such complex behavior even more pressing. This behavior began to be seen not as an anomaly that could be ignored, but as a defining characteristic of the species. Neo and the other individuals in the Lasidi chamber proved that Homo naledi wasn't just an anatomical mosaic, but also a surprising and complex species behaviorally. One of the greatest turning points in human history is the control of fire. Fire offers the possibility of warming, protection, hunting, and most importantly, increasing nutritional value by cooking food. This revolutionary technology is generally associated with large-brained hominins like Homo erectus. However, a new and highly controversial claim put forward in recent years regarding the Rising Star cave system has the potential to fundamentally shake this narrative. The claim that Homo naledi used fire. This claim is based on observations made in the depths of the cave system. Lee Berger, leader of the discovery team, and his team reported that they encountered soot traces, charred remains, and small hearth-like structures on the ceilings and walls of the passages leading to the Dinaledi and Lasidi chambers. If these traces were truly created by Homo naledi, this would be an incredible discovery, because this would mean that they not only carried their dead to the pitch-black corridors of the cave, but also used torches or small fires to light their way during this dangerous journey. This is an act requiring multi-layered planning, cooperation, and technological skill. Controlling fire and safely carrying it through a narrow cave passage requires quite advanced cognitive abilities. This situation would completely demolish the paradigm regarding Homo naledi's small brain. This claim was met with great excitement, along with serious skepticism in the scientific world. Critics note that concrete and dated evidence to support this claim hasn't yet been published. They emphasize the possibility that the soot traces in the cave might have been created by natural processes, for example, spontaneous combustion of bat guano, or left by modern humans who entered the cave in later periods. To prove that a trace truly belongs to Homo naledi, the layer where the trace is found needs to be dated to the same period as the Homo naledi fossils, approximately 300,000 years ago. This is technically an extremely difficult process. The presence of fire could also add a new dimension to the mystery of burial in the Dinaledi chamber. Perhaps fire was part of the ritual. Perhaps they were leaving their dead in an illuminated chamber. This would add even more symbolic meaning to this act. However, all of this is just speculation for now. The claim that Homo naledi used fire is not yet a finding that has passed scientific peer review and gained general acceptance. However, it's a possibility with very high potential. If future analyses confirm this claim, Homo naledi will solidify its place as one of history's most astonishing hominin species, one that will require us to rewrite even the most fundamental assumptions about human evolution. Another claim as revolutionary and controversial as the fire use claim is that Homo naledi deliberately made marks or carvings on cave walls. Art or symbolic marking has long been accepted as one of the highest-level cognitive abilities that was the monopoly of only Homo sapiens and perhaps Neanderthals. It's the most concrete evidence of abstract thinking, the effort to communicate and load meaning onto the world. For this reason, the claim that the small-brained Homo naledi exhibited such behavior created a great shock effect in the paleoanthropology community. This claim is also based on observations made in the depths of the cave system. The research team announced that they noticed intersecting lines on some cave walls that appeared unable to be explained by natural erosion, square-like shapes, and geometric patterns resembling the hashtag symbol. They proposed that these marks were deliberately carved into the wall using a tool. If this is true, these marks could be some of the oldest known rock art or symbolic carvings. This would mean that Homo Naledi not only buried its dead and used fire, but also tried to communicate through symbols or create meaning. This shows that their world wasn't just about the struggle for survival, but might also have had a world of meaning and symbolism. Perhaps these marks were a map, a clan symbol, or part of a ritual. We may never know why they were made. But their very existence indicates that their mental world was much more complex than we thought. Just like the fire claim, this claim was also met with great skepticism in the scientific world. Critics state that it needs to be proven whether these marks are truly human-made. Natural cracks in rock walls or animal claw marks can sometimes resemble deliberate carvings. Microscopic analyses and detailed geological studies are needed to show that the marks were truly made with a tool. Additionally, proving that these marks were made by Homo Naledi is even harder than proving fire traces. It's necessary to show that the surface where the marks are found belongs to the same period as the fossils, and to be sure that they weren't made by modern humans in a later period. As of now, this art claim is based on even less concrete evidence than the fire claim and hasn't been published in a scientific journal and approved by reviewers. This makes it an exciting possibility, but still an unverified hypothesis. However, the very existence of these claims shows what a provocative species Homo Naledi is. It makes us question where we should draw the boundaries of our ancestors' abilities. Perhaps the dawn of symbolic thought dates back much earlier, and to a much smaller brain than we thought. The discovery of Homo Naledi once again revealed the branching, complex structure of human evolution. Placing it in the family tree wasn't as easy a task as it first appeared. Its mosaic anatomy, harboring both primitive and modern features together, created serious confusion about where to place it. Different scientists, focusing on different features, suggested placing it on different branches of the tree. Some researchers, emphasizing primitive features like small brain size, shoulders suited for climbing, and conical ribcage, argued that Homo Naledi was a very early branch of the Homo genus. According to this view, it represented a lineage that separated from Australopithecus about 2 million years ago and was related to species like Homo habilis. In this scenario, Homo Naledi was like a living fossil that survived in isolation in South Africa and preserved its primitive features for hundreds of thousands of years. This could explain its surprisingly young age. Other researchers focused on advanced features like modern hand, wrist, and foot structure. This view proposed that Homo Naledi evolved from a more advanced ancestor like Homo erectus, but later some of its features, especially brain size, decreased. Brain size reduction is a rare but observed situation in evolution and is generally associated with limited resources in isolated environments, for example, in species living on islands. Although it's clear that Homo Naledi didn't live on an island, perhaps it reduced its brain size while adapting to a certain ecological niche. The currently most accepted view is that Homo Naledi forms a separate branch of its own within the Homo genus. It's neither a direct ancestor of ours nor a close relative of another known species like Homo erectus or Neanderthals. It's an independent arm of the human evolution tree whose existence we weren't previously aware of. This arm perhaps separated from a place close to the origins of the Homo genus and drew its own evolutionary path. Genetic analyses are the most powerful tools that could shed light on this matter. However, to date, it hasn't been possible to obtain DNA from Homo Naledi fossils due to the hot and humid conditions of the Rising Star Cave. If DNA can be obtained in the future, its exact place in the family tree can be determined definitively, and its kinship relationship with other hominin species can be clarified. But until then, Homo Naledi's place will remain a subject of debate based on comparison of anatomical features. One thing is certain: its existence shows that human evolution isn't a simple straight line, but rather resembles a lush and complex bush where many different human species existed at the same time. The revelation that Homo Naledi lived approximately 300,000 years ago brought up one of the most exciting questions. Did they encounter other human species living in Africa at that time, especially our direct ancestors, early Homo sapiens? This is a scenario fascinating to even imagine. Thinking of two different human species walking in the same landscape, using the same water sources, and perhaps watching each other from afar deepens our perception of human history. At that time, South Africa might have been home to more than one hominin species. Besides Homo Naledi, it's probable that Homo heidelbergensis or early Homo sapiens populations, which used larger brains and more advanced stone tools, also lived in the region. These two groups might have occupied quite different ecological niches from each other. Homo Naledi, with its mosaic anatomy, might have been adapted to more forested, rocky terrain requiring climbing, while Homo sapiens ancestors might have focused more on hunting large prey in open savannas. This ecological separation might have allowed the two species to coexist without entering into direct competition. However, there must have been moments when encounters were inevitable. Their paths might have crossed at the edge of a water pool, at the beginning of a hunt, or in search of a shelter. How did these encounters end? Were they peaceful, or did they end in conflict? Did they see each other as human, or just as another animal species to compete with? Finding answers to these questions in the archaeological record is nearly impossible. However, we can look for some indirect clues. For example, we can look at whether tools made by another hominin species or bones belonging to another species are found in the layers where Homo Naledi fossils are found. No such evidence has been encountered to date. Genetic science might also provide answers on this matter one day. If DNA can be obtained from Homo Naledi, we can look at whether there are traces belonging to them in the modern human genome. We know that we interbred with other archaic human species like Neanderthals and Denisovans. Perhaps our ancestors also exchanged genes with Homo Naledi. This is a completely speculative possibility for now. Even if they had encountered each other, the differences between the two species would have been obvious. Homo Naledi was smaller, more gracile in build, and probably had a different form of communication. Homo sapiens ancestors were larger, stronger, and probably had more complex language and technology. Whatever the nature of these encounters, the existence of Homo Naledi reminds us that our ancestors didn't evolve in an empty world. Their world was full of other humans who were like them, but also very different. This situation makes the emergent story of our species richer and much more interesting. Like every great scientific discovery, the announcement of Homo Naledi also brought intense debates and criticisms in the scientific world. These debates are healthy due to the nature of science, because they ensure that claims are supported by solid evidence and help the progress of knowledge. Debates about Homo Naledi focused on almost every aspect of the discovery, from species validity to behavioral interpretations. One of the first and most fundamental criticisms was whether Homo Naledi was truly a new species. Some scientists proposed that the fossils found might belong to a small and primitive population of a known species, Homo erectus. According to them, the unique features attributed to Homo Naledi actually fell within the normal variation range within a population. However, Homo Naledi's mosaic anatomy, for example, the climbing shoulder structure not seen in Homo erectus, and the consistent morphology of the individuals in the Naledi chamber, greatly weakened this criticism. Today, the vast majority of scientists accept that Homo Naledi is a valid and separate species. The most heated debate revolved around the deliberate placement hypothesis. Many paleoanthropologists were skeptical of the idea that a small-brained hominin could exhibit such complex behavior. Critics argued that the research team hadn't sufficiently excluded other possibilities, natural trap, predator accumulation, etc. They stated that the geological structure of the chamber and potential past entrances needed to be examined in more detail. In response to these criticisms, the discovery team conducted years of detailed geological and taphonomic fossilization science studies on the cave system and concluded that deliberate placement was still the most plausible explanation. The discovery of the Naledi chamber also strengthened this thesis. The claims of fire use in rock art further inflamed the debates. Since these claims haven't yet been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals and aren't supported by concrete dated evidence, they're viewed as speculative by a large part of the scientific community. Critics argue that announcing such sensational claims to the public before the scientific process is complete could undermine trust in science. This emphasizes an important point about how science works. Ideas are put forward, evidence is presented, and ruthlessly questioned by the community. Only the ideas based on the most solid evidence survive. The debates around Homo Naledi aren't finished yet. Each new finding brings new questions and new debates with it. However, this process doesn't make Homo Naledi's story less interesting. On the contrary, it makes it a living, dynamic, and human example of scientific discovery. Homo naledi isn't just a new fossil species. It's a mirror that fundamentally changes our thinking about human evolution. Its legacy is tearing up the simple and linear schemas in textbooks and replacing them with a much more complex, unpredictable, and surprising picture. It has given us three fundamental and profound lessons about the origins of our own species. The first lesson is that human evolution is like a bush. For many years, human evolution was portrayed as a straight line of progression extending from Australopithecus to Homo habilis, from there to Homo erectus, and finally to Homo sapiens. This ladder of progress idea was based on the assumption that we were the inevitable and most superior outcome. The existence of Homo naledi showed how wrong this idea was. Its strange mixture of primitive and modern features, existing in the same period as our ancestors, proved that evolution doesn't progress in a single direction. On the contrary, in the past, many different human species, different experiments in being human, existed at the same time. Our family tree resembles a lush bush with many branches, some of which dried up and disappeared, while others continued, rather than a single trunk. Homo naledi is an unexpected branch of this bush that we didn't know about before. The second lesson is that brain size isn't everything. In paleoanthropology, a large brain tended to be equated with intelligence and complex behaviors. Features like tool use, social structure, language, and symbolic thought were assumed to be directly related to increase in brain volume. Homo naledi put a question mark on this equation. With its orange-sized brain, it might have exhibited extremely complex behavior, like deliberately leaving its dead in the depths of a cave. If the fire and art claims are confirmed, this situation will become even more striking. This shows that intelligence and behavioral complexity cannot be measured only by the number of neurons. Perhaps the organization of the brain, the connections between different regions, is more important than size. Homo naledi is forcing us to rethink the nature of intelligence. The third and final lesson is that there's much more to discover. Homo naledi was discovered in one of the world's most researched paleoanthropological areas, right next to a large city like Johannesburg. That such an important finding remained hidden for so long shows how many secrets our planet still holds. Under Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world, many more chapters of the human story that we don't yet know might be lying. Homo naledi reminds us to be humble, and that what we don't know may be far more than what we know. It's a window to the past as much as it's a harbinger of future discoveries. The story of Homo naledi is full of questions more than answers. Every bone extracted from the depths of the Rising Star Cave brings a new mystery with it. These unanswered questions aren't only about the biology of a species, but also about the most fundamental issues regarding the nature of being human, the origins of consciousness and culture. These questions draw the roadmap for future research and continue to make Homo naledi one of the most exciting areas of paleoanthropology. The biggest question is still the same: how did the bones in the Dinaledi and Lasidi chambers get there? Although the deliberate placement hypothesis is currently the strongest candidate, there's still no definitive proof. What was the motivation behind this behavior? Was this a ritual, or just a practical way of disposing of bodies? What did they think about death? The answer to these questions could open the doors to their mental world. The second big question concerns their cognitive abilities. Did they really use fire? Did they draw symbols on walls? How did they communicate with each other? Did they have a primitive language? These questions test the potential limits of a small brain. More sensitive analyses and dating studies to be conducted in the cave in the future could confirm or refute the fire and art claims. This will completely change the direction of Homo naledi's story. A third group of questions concerns their daily life and ecology. How wide an area did they roam? What were their social group sizes? What were their lifespans? Did they interact with other hominin species? The answers to these questions can be found through new archaeological excavations in areas outside the cave system where they lived and hunted. Discovering a living area or a site where tools are found belonging to them would provide invaluable information. Finally, there's the mystery of their extinction. Why and when did their lineage become extinct? Was it climate change or competition with larger-brained and technologically more advanced hominins like our species that brought their end? Their extinction story reminds us of the ruthless realities of evolution and how fragile the balance of survival is. Homo Naledi may be a remnant of the past, but the questions it asks are extremely current. It reminds us that our own species wasn't alone, that in the past the world hosted a much more diverse human landscape. Research in the Rising Star Cave continues, and each new discovery adds a new brushstroke to the portrait of this mysterious relative. The story isn't finished yet. In fact, it's just beginning. And so, in the dark corridors of the Rising Star Cave, Homo Naledi's silent story continues to echo. A face both familiar and strange, a whisper from our past, a being where the primitive and modern, the known and unknown converge. Perhaps its greatest legacy isn't the definitive answers it left us, but the profound questions it opened in our minds. It reminds us that there wasn't a single way of being human, that evolution conducted countless experiments, and that everything we thought we knew could change with a single bone emerging from beneath the ground. Their world no longer exists, but the traces they left will continue to illuminate us on our journey to understanding our own origins.